Well, good morning. It's good to see you. I hope you had a Merry Christmas. So glad that you were here braving the rain and the sleepies and decided to be here. This is our last Sunday of the year, really kind of our last Sunday of our Be Still series, and it's a gift that we offer one another, the time and space to share stillness. And I don't know if it's a more valuable gift, the gift of stillness, in the weeks leading up to Christmas or in the week following Christmas. There's probably a need for stillness in both cases. But today we'll share some scripture, a passage for me that's become increasingly important over the last few years, from John chapter 9, as well as Psalm 130. And I'll talk a little bit more about how these come together, relate together, and how they've been influential for me over the last few years. But it's important, too, as we get started this morning, to sort of recognize where we are in the rhythm of the church year. For centuries, if not millennia now, the Christian church around the world has been marking and observing what's called the liturgical calendar. Liturgical, or liturgy, is a word you've probably heard before if you've been around churches, particularly more traditional churches before. Often refers to the sort of rhythm or act of worship. Liturgy literally means the work of the people. What a great way to describe the worship of God's people, as the work of the people. But the liturgical calendar is a way that the church observes the 365 days of the year and the rhythms of the Christian life. Just as we have 4 seasons of spring, summer, fall, and winter that mark the seasons of life, of planting, growing, harvesting, and then rest. So too does the liturgical calendar move through the development, the growth, the cycle of the Christian life. And so for us in a church that's not very liturgical or traditional, perhaps the most common seasons that we observe are Advent and Lent. Those are 2 of the several liturgical seasons. But right now, at this moment, we are in the time that's referred to as Christmas tide, or Christmas time. And it's a very short window. It's exactly 12 days long, which is where we get the 12 days of Christmas from. These 12 days that here we have been waiting, we've made our way through the season of Advent. We should be mindful of the fact that the season of Advent is a good bit longer than the season of Christmastide, right? That the waiting is longer than the celebrating. But right now, this morning, today, around the world, Christians are celebrating what it means to be living into a Christmas world. A world where Christ has come. The light of the world, as we talked about on Christmas Eve, is here. Griffin, our oldest, is 3 years old, and so he just turned 3 at the beginning of December, and so many of you were very kind and were asking about how is he feeling about Christmas this year. And that we really felt like this would kind of be his first Christmas, that he sort of was a participant. Joel, our youngest, is about 14 months old, and he has no idea what's going on, right? He was just happy to be there for most of Christmas so far. But Griffin was kind of old enough to sort of know what was going on. The best way I could describe it is this. For us, as we went through Christmas this week, and he's up with family in Franklin right now for another day or 2 with Joy and the boys, and Griffin is at an age where he has no idea what's going on. He has no idea what to expect from Christmas, but he knows he's excited about it. And so when I went in to get him on Christmas morning, we were here Christmas Day and didn't start to go see family until the 26th. Kind of to perfectly illustrate where he's at is I went into his room Christmas morning, opened the door, he says, "Good morning, Dad." I said, "Good morning, Griffin." I said, "Guess what, buddy? Today is Christmas Day. It's Christmas morning." And he was awake, laying down. He hadn't gotten up yet. He was just laying in his bed. I lean over, I say, "Buddy, it's Christmas Day." He looks up and he says, "Wow." And he starts clapping. like this. He has no idea what's going on. He has no idea what's waiting for him that day or in the days to come, as he saw grandparents and cousins and all of that. But a part of him knew it was a special day, right? He knew something was different that day. It's Christmas. Wow. Right? And it's true for us too, that today it's different. It's different than Advent, right? Christmas tide, Christ has come. The world is different. There is now light in the midst of this pitch black world. But we're still learning what to expect, aren't we? We're still learning what it means to live in a Christmas world. We're still learning how to make sense of Christ, how to make sense of ourselves in this. But so if you're wondering where to start, if you're wondering how to move forward, a good place to start is with that recognition. And even in some small way, that sense of wonder. Christ has come. Wow. And let's go from there. If you've got a copy of Scripture this morning, let me invite you to turn to John chapter 9. And as you're doing that, let me give a little bit of context here. We're going to, this morning, spend some time with the Pharisees. And we've talked a little bit about them. This conversation with the Pharisees is one that I've really just kind of in my own personal faith journey sort of been looking at and wrestling with and learning from what the Lord's been sharing with me over the last couple of years. And so bits and pieces of this we've talked about. Both on Sunday mornings and maybe in conversations you and I have had together or in small groups. But this morning it seemed appropriate, both as we begin sort of a new season, a new life of living as people in a world where Christ has come. There's newness for us today. But we're also living today, it's the last Sunday of the year. It's the end of something with newness on the horizon. And so it seemed like an appropriate time for us to begin to prepare for the new year, to prepare to be Christians in a world where Christ has come. And so this morning I wanted to kind of sit with this conversation with the Pharisees. And let me just say this real quick by a little bit of context and preface for us this morning. First, a little disclaimer. So I'm going to read for us this morning all of chapter 9. Now, if you've got it in front of you, you may be saying, whoa, it's 41 verses. I know, I counted them. And I'd also like to remind you that we don't have Bible study. So I'm good for a good hour and a half, 2 hours this morning, right? No, but this would be my invitation to you here in the last week of our Be Still series. Let this be, if nothing else, your time of stillness this morning. Take an opportunity to sit and be still and hear a good story. All right? But let me also encourage you, the Pharisees are one, at least as I was growing up and got to begin learning the stories of the church, that the Pharisees are often for us the villains of the story, right? You've got Jesus and the disciples against the Pharisees, and it's just these kind of recalcitrant, difficult, problematic people, and here are the good guys, right? Our people, the people we would be if we were in the story. But let me encourage you as you hear the story this morning to give the Pharisees a fair hearing, even a gracious hearing. Perhaps I think part of the reason I continue to find myself attracted to stories of the Pharisees, and this story in particular is one I've sort of been working on or working with for probably the last 18 months or so, is that the Pharisees in many ways look an awful lot like us. They were the people who knew. They were the church-going folks. They were the educated folks. They were the people that had all the access, all the training, all the right tools to know God and to see God at work in the world, and yet they missed it. They missed it. And so my invitation for you this morning is to perhaps extend to them a little bit of grace, and because I think by doing so, we extend ourselves a little bit of grace in doing just that. So I'm going to read for us John chapter 9, and as you're being kind as best you can to the Pharisees, let me also encourage you to, as you hear this, pay attention to the role of expectations. The role of expectations and what's going on here in the story. Both who has expectations and who does not, what those are and what they are not, and how that may influence the story. One last piece, there'll be a little bit, obviously in 41 verses, more than we can focus on this morning. There's a section early on in the story you'll see that we'll be talking about a man born blind, and there's some real difficult theology, a difficult section where the disciples want to know who's to blame for this man's blindness. In the ancient world, it was very common to look at disability, to look at disease, to look at any kind of pain or suffering as a form of judgment in the world. And Jesus seems to suggest an alternative way for that, but it's an equally challenging and difficult word that he offers for us. I'm going to name that and also ask you to set it aside because we'll need to come back to that and give it more attention at another time. So I don't want to just glaze right over that. I want to recognize that it's difficult, but that there's a few other things for us to focus on this morning. It's also worth paying attention for us too that the Pharisees, one last thing we need to know about them, is that the Pharisees are actually in many ways the most like Jesus. Which is perhaps why they have the most difficulty getting along. That of the three main groups of Jews in the New Testament world, there's the Sadducees, the Pharisees, and the Essenes. The Sadducees are your temple folks. It's why when Jesus is called right before the cross to go before the Sanhedrin, it's before the Sadducees. They're the temple establishment. The Essenes are a little bit more of a radical, kind of outside the box group that's had a history of fomenting rebellion and challenge and those kinds of things. But it's the Pharisees in ancient Judaism that believe in resurrection. It's the Pharisees in ancient Judaism that believe in angels and a spiritual world, right? It's the Pharisees who are very similar to Jesus, and yet it's the Pharisees that have the most difficult time seeing Jesus for Jesus, all right? So that's a little bit of context, a little bit of background. So, without any more than that, I'm going to grab my water because it is 41 verses, and we'll get started this morning. Sit back, relax, and be still. This is what John's gospel has to say to us. It says, as Jesus was walking along, he saw a man who had been blind from birth. Rabbi, his disciples asked him, why was this man born blind? Was it because of his own sins or his parents' sins? It was not because of his sins or his parents' sins, Jesus answered. This happened so the power of God could be seen in him. We must quickly carry out the tasks assigned us by the one who sent us. The night is coming, and then no one can work. But while I am here in the world, I am the light of the world. Then he spit on the ground, made mud with the saliva, and spread the mud over the blind man's eyes. He told him, go wash yourself in the pool of Siloam. Siloam means sent. So the man went and washed and came back seeing. His neighbors and others who knew him as a blind beggar asked each other, isn't this the man who used to sit and beg? Some said he was, and others said, no, he looks just like him. But the beggar kept saying, yes, I am the same one. They asked, who healed you? What happened? He told them, the man they called Jesus made mud and spread it over my eyes and told me, go to the pool of Siloam and wash yourself. So I went and washed, and now I can see. Where is he now? They asked. I don't know, he replied. Then they took the man who had been blind to the Pharisees, because it was on the Sabbath that Jesus had made the mud and healed him. The Pharisees asked the man all about it. So he told them, "He put the mud over my eyes, and when I washed it away, I could see." Some of the Pharisees said, "This man Jesus is not from God, for he is working on the Sabbath." Others said, "But how could an ordinary sinner do such miraculous signs?" So there was a deep division of opinion among them. Then the Pharisees again questioned the man who had been blind and demanded, "What's your opinion about this man who healed you?" The man replied, "I think he must be a prophet." The Jewish leaders still refused to believe the man had been blind and could now see. So they called in his parents. They asked them, "Is this your son? Was he born blind? If so, how can he now see?" His parents replied, "We know this is our son and that he was born blind, but we don't know how he can see or who healed him. Ask him. He's old enough to speak for himself." His parents said this because they were afraid of the Jewish leaders, who had announced that anyone saying Jesus was the Messiah would be expelled from the synagogue. That's why they said, "He's old enough. Ask him." So for the second time, they called in the man who had been blind and told him, "God should get the glory for this, because we know this man, Jesus, is a sinner." "I don't know whether he is a sinner," the man replied, "but I know this. I was blind, and now I can see." "But what did he do?" they asked. "How did he heal you?" "Look," the man exclaimed, "I told you once, didn't you listen? Why do you want to hear it again? Do you want to become his disciples too?" Then they cursed him and said, "You are his disciple, but we are disciples of Moses. We know God spoke to Moses, but we don't even know where this man comes from." "Why, that's very strange," the man replied. "He healed my eyes, and you don't know where he comes from? We know that God doesn't listen to sinners, but he's ready to hear those who worship him and do his will. Ever since the world began, no one has been able to open the eyes of someone born blind. If this man were not from God, he couldn't have done it." "You were born a total sinner," they answered. "Are you trying to teach us?" And they threw him out of the synagogue. When Jesus heard what had happened, he found the man and asked, "Do you believe in the Son of Man?" The man answered, "Who is he, sir? I want to believe in him." "You've seen him," Jesus said, "and he is speaking to you." "Yes, Lord, I believe," the man said, and he worshiped Jesus. Then Jesus told him, "I entered this world to render judgment, to give sight to the blind and to show those who think they see that they are blind." Some Pharisees who were standing nearby heard him and asked, "Are you saying we're blind?" "If you were blind, you wouldn't be guilty," Jesus replied. "But you remain guilty because you claim you can see." What a story, right? What a moment. There's a lot going on here, and we really could spend a few hours, a few weeks on this. The first of several things that's important for us to note is the significance of the healing. It's very easy for us to take this for granted because of how fortunate we are to enjoy, for lack of a better term, modern medicine. That we know plenty of people who can't see and then they get glasses. Right? That this is a world where people in our day and time go from being unable to see to being able to see. But this was not the case in the ancient world. That's what's so radical and so different, that blindness was for them a permanent limitation, a permanent form of brokenness and hurt, of separation from the world, from community, from productivity and their society. They had never seen a single person ever healed this way before. This wasn't a case where they're saying, "What do you think? Was he blind? I don't know. Did he go see Dr. Ming Wang and get LASIK? I don't know," right? "I hear he's great. Did you know that he ballroom dances too?" This isn't a world where healing of this kind takes place. It was unimaginable, unfathomable for them. And so this disruption, this surprise, this miraculous restoration, we don't want to understate it. We don't want to make it seem like you just got some cool glasses from Warby Parker or a new 1-800-CONTACTS prescription, right? That here is a man separated from people, from society, who's left begging at a pool, at a common religious and cultural gathering spot. And he's been now restored to something seemingly a full participant in the community. This is a radical transformation of brokenness into wholeness. But what I want us to focus on this morning, though, is who we are and who we might be in this story. Because the challenge, the difficulty, what John is so beautiful at here in including this story is that nobody knows who Jesus is. It would be really easy, cut and dry, black and white, right and wrong, if the Pharisees didn't know who Jesus was and the blind man did. But the blind man doesn't know who Jesus is. The blind man misses it too. And so who's the hero here? Who's the winner? Who's the one worthy of replication? Right? Where's the word for us? Where's the challenge for us this morning? We see, I think there's a few things going on that's relevant and meaningful for us. You see, nobody in this story woke up that morning expecting Jesus to heal this man. In fact, not even the blind man did. Because go back and look here at the beginning. Let's say in verse 6, where the miracle begins. Jesus sees the blind man, who, by the way, is not even asking to be healed. He doesn't say, hey, I hear Jesus is here, the Messiah, the miracle worker. Jesus, come over here. Let me touch your cloak. Spit on my eyes, heal me. No, he is just simply living his day-to-day life, going about his day-to-day existence. And Jesus sees him and goes over to him. But I think perhaps the most miraculous thing over and above the healing and the restoration of his eyesight isn't that he lets this strange man spit on some mud and rub it on his eyes, though where I come from, that would be pretty miraculous, right? I don't know about you, but I'm not really big on spit and mud in my eyes coming together, particularly when I'm not asking for it, particularly when I don't know who this person is. But I don't think that's the most surprising response that the man offers. The most surprising response that the man offers that day is not allowing Jesus to rub mud on his face, but it's when Jesus says to him, now get up and go and wash in the pool. Because what does the man do? He gets up, he goes, and he washes in the pool. He doesn't know who Jesus is. He didn't ask for this. And yet there was something about this man who said, you know what? I'm willing to give it a try. You know what? I'm willing to follow this strange guy's request. Because maybe, just maybe, it'll be worth it. The fundamental difference as I read this story between the man and the Pharisees isn't that one of them knew who Jesus was and one didn't. It wasn't that one knew Jesus was going to heal him and one didn't. It's that one maintained the capacity for God to show up in a surprising way and the other didn't. The great sin of the Pharisees that morning isn't that they wanted to observe the law. The law came from God. The law was good. The law is what they were supposed to be doing. The sin of the Pharisees that morning is that they could not imagine a world where God could surprise them. And because of that, they missed it. Here he was, the Messiah in their midst, at arm's length, and they missed it. Why? Because they couldn't conceive of a world where the Messiah would do something they didn't expect, like healing on the Sabbath. And so the choice for us this morning, the choice here in John 9 isn't, are we going to follow the law or not? Are we going to believe in Jesus or not? The choice for us this morning is, are we going to be the kind of people as we go into a new year? Are we going to be the kind of people as we transition from Advent to Christmastide? The kind of people who bear the light of the world, who sing joy to the world on Christmas Eve? Are we going to be the kind of people who allow God to surprise us, or who only allow God to work in ways that we fully expect? That's the choice for you, and that's the choice for me as we look at this new year. And so the question is, well, I'd like to be this guy. I'd like to be the man who had the capacity when a stranger out of nowhere, out of the darkness of my blindness, shows up, rubs mud on my face and says, go wash it off. I want to be the kind of person that says, okay. I want to be the kind of person who is ready, willing, and able to be surprised by God. I want to be the kind of person who says, I don't want to miss what God is going to do because I'm too busy expecting what God should do. I want to be like this man. How do I do it? What's the difference? What happened to them? Not that day, but all of the days before. All of the days leading up to that moment that allowed one man to respond one way and a group of Pharisees to respond another. You can keep your finger there in John 9, and as you do that, flip over with me real briefly to Psalm 130. It's quick, don't worry. It's not 41 verses, only 8. I'm going to read for us this morning out of the NIV. The NIV renders this one particularly beautifully, but the Psalm 130, as you go there, you'll see it's one of the Psalms of Ascent. It's one of the collection of psalms that were sung as people made their way to Jerusalem for religious festivals. You may remember we've talked about this once before, where in the ancient Israelite mind, Jerusalem was the height. It was the pinnacle of the world, of their religious geography. So no matter where you were, north, south, east, or west, wherever you were coming from, when you went to Jerusalem, you always went up. You always go up to Jerusalem, which is why these psalms that were sung as people traveled up to Jerusalem were called the Psalms of Ascent. The Psalms of going up to Jerusalem. And I would submit to you that I think the difference, the preparation, the heart work is what differentiated the blind man and the Pharisees. That there was something about who they were, the spirit that they cultivated in the waiting, in the stillness. That when God did arrive, when God did show up in their midst, it was who they already were that allowed them to respond in such radically different ways. And I think this psalm gives us a brief glimpse into the spirituality, the heart of the blind man. This is what it says, beginning in verse 1. Out of the depths I cry to you, O Lord. O Lord, hear my voice. Let your ears be attentive to my cry for mercy. If you, O Lord, kept a record of sins, O Lord, who could stand? But with you there is forgiveness. Therefore you are feared. I wait for the Lord. My soul waits. And in his word I put my hope. My soul waits for the Lord more than watchmen wait for the morning. More than watchmen wait for the morning. O Israel, put your hope in the Lord. For with the Lord is unfailing love, and with him is full redemption. He himself will redeem Israel from all their sins. Let me draw your attention particularly back to verse 5 and 6. I wait for the Lord. My soul waits. And in his word I put my hope. My soul waits for the Lord. More than watchmen wait for the morning. More than watchmen wait for the morning. What a beautiful picture. My soul waits. My soul waits in full expectation that God will show up. My soul waits in full expectation that forgiveness will come, but I wait. I wait for it. I wait for it patiently. I wait for it peacefully. I wait for it with openness. I don't wait for it with the kind of busyness of the Pharisees that said, well, if we just keep the law close enough, if we just learn all there is to learn, then we'll learn our way out of a need for God. We'll observe our way out of a need for God. The Pharisees was a faith not of waiting, but of busyness, of control, that over time narrowed their capacity to be surprised. They said, there's no way God could work on the Sabbath. There's no way the Son of Man could be here. There's no way this guy could be the Messiah. Why? Because he works on the Sabbath. And yet here is a man born blind who says, I see something you don't. I see a man of God at work. Why? Because I've spent my life waiting. Out of the depths I cry to you, O Lord. O Lord, hear my voice. Let your ears be attentive to my cry for mercy. My soul waits for the Lord more than watchmen wait for the morning. More than watchmen wait for the morning. It's tough for us to know what it's like to be an ancient watchman, a sentry, your translation may say. More than watchmen wait for the morning. In the ancient world, before electricity, before dependable lights, to be a watchman in the pitch black was a dangerous job. And so what did it mean as a watchman to see the light of dawn come? It meant safety. It meant security. It meant rest. It meant goodness. It meant life. It meant light. It meant that you could release control. That something else, someone else, could take responsibility. And I think there's something, if I had to guess, about that blind man that day that had a maturity and an understanding rooted in this. A willingness to say, I don't need to be the Lord of my life, for God can be. I don't need to tell God how to show up. I can let God choose how to show up. I pray for healing. I pray for forgiveness. I pray for a miracle. My wants, my desires, my dreams, my hopes, they're all valid and good. but I choose to wait. My soul chooses to wait. I don't want my expectations of how God should work to make me miss how God chooses to work. My soul waits, like a watchman waits for morning, like a watchman waits for morning. As you think about your new year, as you think about the kind of person, the kind of child, the kind of parent, the kind of spouse, the kind of student, the kind of worker, the kind of owner, the kind of boss, the kind of believer you want to be, we all have a choice this year. What are we waiting for? What is our soul waiting for this year? The miracle that morning was made possible because the blind man was ready to respond. So here's my challenge for you. Here's my invitation for you this week, this year. Pick just one part of your life. Any of those things I mentioned. Maybe it's for you as a student. Maybe it's for you as a friend or a coworker. Maybe it's for you as a spouse or a parent, a child, whatever it may be. Pick one area of your life and make a conscious decision to wait with openness. To wait, fully expecting for God to work a miracle, fully expecting for God to show up, fully expecting for God to enter into that area of your life. Pray about it, think about it, make that decision, but choose to watch. Like a watchman waits for morning, choose to watch, not with an expectation of how God will show up, not with an expectation of how God should show up, not with an expectation of what God owes you, but with an expectation that God will show up in a way better, more vibrant, more dynamic than probably you or I could imagine. Choose it. Write it down. Put it on your bathroom mirror. Make it a background on your phone. Leave it at your desk at work. Do whatever you need to do, but spend this week, spend this year waiting for God to show up in one way, in one part of your life. Because who we choose to be in the waiting makes all the difference for who we will be when God shows up. I think in some small way, that's what it means to live in Christmastide. That's what it means to live with the light of the world. That's what it means to move from darkness into light. Here in just a minute, Tyler will come back up, but before we do that, one last time as we end our Be Still series, we'll play for you. Let me invite you. We'll play for you our video with a short song by the Fray called Be Still. A reminder that God is present, that God hasn't left us or forsaken us. A reminder that even in the waiting, God is at work. Even if it's a wait longer than we would like, even if it's a wait harder than we would like, even if it is a wait darker than we would like, God has not left you or forsaken you. His invitation to you is simply to be still and to wait. Like watchmen wait for the morning, like watchmen wait for the morning. Let's hear it together and be still.